Sarah Dawson dragged a 200-pound barrel of salted meat across the slaughterhouse floor, alone. Her boots sliding in the blood and grime. Her teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached, and not a single man in Cutter's Ridge offered to help. They just watched. Some laughed. That was the morning Ethan Cole rode down from the mountain for the first time in 5 years, and the first thing he saw was a woman the whole town had given up on still fighting, still standing. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer heat in Cutter's Ridge came down hard and mean, the kind that cracked lips and dried out wells, and made tempers run short before noon. The dust on Main Street was pale as ash, and it rose in small clouds with every step, every wagon wheel, every boot heel dragging across the packed earth. It was the kind of town that looked decent from a distance, and revealed itself slowly. The closer you got, the peeling paint on the storefronts, the way the men gathered outside the saloon. Before 10 in the morning, the way certain women were greeted by name, and certain others were looked through like glass. Ethan Cole had not been down from the mountain in 5 years. He came for supplies, nothing more. He had a list written on the back of a torn flour sack rope, salt-dried beans, rifle cartridges, a new blade if the mercantile had one worth buying. He had learned a long time ago not to come to town for anything else because towns had a way of trying to give you things you hadn't asked for and taking things you hadn't offered. He rode in on a dark bay horse, big and quiet, the kind of animal that matched its rider. Ethan sat straight in the saddle, without looking stiff the way men sit when the saddle has been their chair for more mornings than they can count. His hat was pushed low. His coat was trail-worn. The leather of his gloves had cracked along the knuckles and been re-stitched in 2 places with whatever cord he had on hand. He wore no badge, carried no air of importance, and drew attention precisely because of that, because a man who doesn't want to be noticed in a small town is always the first one noticed. People looked up from their work as he passed. A woman on the board sidewalk leaned toward her neighbor and said something behind her hand. 2 men outside the feed store tracked him with their eyes. A boy sitting on a barrel stopped kicking his feet and stared. Ethan didn't acknowledge any of it. His eyes moved in the practiced way of a man who spent his days reading landscape for threats, scanning, settling, moving on. He tied his horse at the post outside the mercantile, checked the knot twice from habit, and stepped up onto the walk. That was when he heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of help. The specific quiet of people watching something hard happen and choosing to keep their hands in their pockets. He stopped at the top of the steps. Around the side of the mercantile along the narrow alley that ran between the store and the building next to it, a woman was moving a barrel. A large one, the kind used for salted pork, heavy enough that a grown man would have bent his knees and asked for a second pair of hands. She was doing it alone, both arms wrapped around its middle boots, braced against the ground. The tendons in her neck pulled taut with effort. Her apron was dark with stains. Her hair had come half loose from its knot. Her face was turned away from him, but he could see the set of her jaw, the rigid line of her shoulders, the way she was refusing to stop. 2 men stood not 8 feet from her. One was leaning against the wall, picking at his nails with a pocket knife. The other had his arms crossed, watching her the way people watch something they find mildly amusing, but not worth interrupting. Neither of them moved. Ethan watched for exactly 3 seconds. Then he stepped down off the walk and crossed the alley in 6 strides. "I'll take the other side," he said. The woman's head came up fast. Her eyes found him, dark eyes, sharp, and guarded, the kind that had learned not to trust an offer quickly. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe late 20s, with a face that wasn't pretty in the way the town would have called pretty, but had something better in its steadiness. A kind of durability that didn't come from ease. "I've got it," she said. Her voice was flat, not rude, just a woman who had learned that accepting help often cost more than refusing it. "You do," Ethan said. "I'm just making it faster." She held his gaze for a moment, measuring. Then she shifted her grip and made room for him. They moved the barrel together in about 45 seconds. set it down against the back wall of the building with a solid thud that sent dust rising from the planks. The two men by the wall had straightened up a little when Ethan walked over. Now they looked away separately, as though they had each developed a sudden interest in something down the street. Ethan didn't look at them either. He pulled off one glove, wiped the salt grime from his palm, and nodded once to the woman. "Ethan Cole," he said. She looked at his hand for a half-second before she shook it. Her grip was firm and brief. "Sarah Dawson. You work here, next door, butcher shop." She nodded toward the narrow door at the end of the alley. "I use their loading dock when deliveries come in. Mr. Hale charges me for the privilege." She said it without bitterness, just as a fact the way you'd state the price of salt. Ethan noted that. "Heavy order," he said. "Weekly," she said. He put his glove back on. She picked up a smaller crate from the ground and balanced it against her hip. Neither of them said anything else. She went through the door. He went back to the front of the mercantile. Inside the store smelled of sawdust and coffee, and the faint iron tang that drifted over from whatever Sarah was running next door. The owner, a man named Gerald Hale, was behind the counter with his reading glasses pushed down his nose going over a ledger. He looked up over the rims when Ethan came through the door. "Cole," he said with the cautious warmth of a man greeting someone whose money he wanted, but whose company he wasn't sure of. "Been a while." 5 years, Ethan said. He put his list on the counter. Hale picked it up and read it, nodded to himself, started moving around the store pulling things from shelves. Ethan walked the perimeter, slowly checking prices on goods he might not have thought to add. "Heard you were up past Ridgeback Creek," Hale said from the back. "Higher than that." "Alone." "Yes." Hale came back around the counter with an armload of goods and started stacking them. 5 years is a long time to be alone, Cole. Town's changed some, growing. He said it with the pride of a man who had profited from the growth. "We've got a good community here now. People putting down real roots." Ethan looked at the rope on the counter. "I need 60 feet of that, not 40. Hale added the rest from the back spool. "There's a social gathering tomorrow evening at the church hall. You're welcome to come. Lot of fine people. Fine young women, too, if you take my meaning." Ethan didn't respond to that. "Speaking of which," Hale said, and his voice shifted into something that wanted to be casual, but wasn't quite. "Have you met the Hartwell girl Lillian? Her father owns the trading company at the end of the street. She's—" The door opened behind Ethan. The quality of the air in the room changed slightly, a tightening. Or maybe a straightening the way people adjust themselves when something they consider important enters. Ethan turned enough to see without turning fully. A young woman had come in. She was wearing a pale blue dress, very clean, with her hair arranged carefully, and her posture set like a painting, every inch composed. She was unquestionably pretty. She knew it too, not arrogantly, but with the comfort of someone who had never had reason to doubt it, which was almost the same thing. She saw Ethan and her smile shifted from general to particular. "Mr. Hale," she said, floating toward the counter, with the ease of someone who had spent her whole life in rooms that welcomed her. "Father needs to settle the account from last month." Then, with the smile turned toward Ethan. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Lillian Hartwell." "Cole," he said. "Are you passing through?" "Supplies." She tilted her head a little, the way women do when they're deciding how interested to be. "Well, I hope Cutter's Ridge makes a favorable impression, Mr. Cole. It truly is a wonderful town. The people here are so warm." She glanced toward the door to the alley, the one that connected to Sarah's loading dock, and something shifted in her expression just briefly. Just a flicker. Most of them anyway. Ethan looked at the door she'd glanced at, then back at her. "I'll need the cartridges boxed separately," he said to Hale. Lillian blinked. Then she rearranged her smile and turned her attention back to the ledger. He ate at the boarding house that evening because the supply order was too heavy for one trip and he'd have to come back for the second load in the morning. Mrs. Aldridge, who ran the boarding house with enormous efficiency and very little warmth, put him at the far end of the supper table, which suited him. There were 6 other boarders at the table. They were the kind of men who built towns, a surveyor, a man from the land office, two brothers who had come to look at cattle operations. They talked with the easy confidence of people who expected the future to accommodate them. The conversation turned, as it often did in small towns, to people. That Dawson woman got into another argument with Greer at the mill today. One of the brothers said, helping himself to more bread. Apparently he shorted her on the tallow order, and she walked right up to the counter and told him so in front of everyone. Did she? The surveyor said. Loud too. Greer looked fit to bust. The brother shook his head with the smile of a man who found other people's embarrassments entertaining. She's got no sense of how to conduct herself. You can't go around town picking fights, especially not... He paused, choosing his words. Especially not in her situation. What situation is that? Ethan said. The table went slightly quiet. People looked at him recalibrating. They had mostly forgotten he was there. Well, the brother said, less comfortable now that he had to explain himself. She's a woman alone, running a business alone. The kind of business that... Another pause. It's not a genteel occupation, and she's not... He seemed to run out of ways to put it that didn't sound exactly like what it was. She's not what the town would call a refined woman. She works hard, Ethan said. He said it the way you state a known fact, not the way you argue a point. Well, yes. The brother looked at his plate. That's true enough. The conversation moved on. Ethan ate his supper and didn't say anything else. In the morning, he went back to the mercantile early before most of the town was moving. The air was still almost cool, which wouldn't last another hour. He was loading the second half of his order into his saddlebags when he heard voices from inside the alley. Not arguing exactly, but close. He came around the corner and found Lillian Hartwell standing at the entrance to the loading dock, dressed again, as if for a portrait, her face wearing an expression of patient contempt. Sarah Dawson was at the far end of the dock, checking a delivery against a handwritten invoice, not looking up. I'm only saying, Lillian was saying in the tone of someone who wanted to sound reasonable and didn't quite get there, that this side of the street is shared by several businesses. And the smell from your... She paused. From your operation has been affecting the Hargrove dress shop next door. Mrs. Hargrove mentioned it to Father. Tell Mrs. Hargrove to shut her back window, Sarah said, still reading the invoice. Lillian's expression tightened. I don't think you understand the position you're in, Miss Dawson. People in this town have been very patient, but there is a question of whether your business is appropriate for this location. Father has spoken to the town council. Your father, Sarah said, looking up for the first time, can take his conversation with the town council and put it wherever he keeps the rest of his opinions about things that aren't his business. There was a silence. Lillian's composure cracked just slightly, not enough to show except around the eyes. You are, she said quietly, the most disagreeable woman I have ever encountered. Good. Sarah went back to her invoice. Then you probably won't be back. You'll lose everything, Lillian said. And now there was something different under the composed voice, not quite satisfaction, but the shape of it. This town will make sure of it. All it takes is a word in the right ears and your license is gone. Your lot too. You'll have nothing. Sarah set the invoice down. She walked the length of the dock slowly, not fast, not threatening, just steady, and stopped when she was close enough that Lillian had to hold her ground or step back. Lillian held it, but just barely. I grew up with nothing, Sarah said. I know exactly what it looks like. You don't scare me. Ethan had been standing at the corner of the building through all of this. He hadn't announced himself. Now Lillian turned and found him standing there, and the composure came back in full force, rearranged and applied quickly like a garment pulled on in a hurry. Mr. Cole. The smile was immediate. I didn't see you. I hope you didn't. A small laugh dismissive. I hope you'll forgive the unpleasantness. We do our best to maintain standards here, but sometimes... Miss Hartwell, Ethan said. She stopped. I need to finish loading. He looked at her steadily. You're standing in the alley. Another silence. A different kind. Lillian looked at him, then at Sarah, then back at him. The calculation happening behind her eyes was visible enough what to do with this. How to read it, whether it was worth pressing. She decided it wasn't. She lifted her chin slightly, arranged her face into something serene, and walked past him and back onto the main street without another word. Ethan watched her go. Then he turned and looked at Sarah, who had gone back to her invoice as if nothing had happened. "You didn't need that," she said without looking up. "Didn't do it for need," he said. She looked up then. Just briefly. "What did you do it for?" He considered that for a moment. "Because she was in the alley," he said. Sarah looked at him for a long beat. Then one corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. She went back to her work. Ethan finished loading his horse. He should have left that morning. His supplies were packed. His bill was settled, and the mountain was a 6-hour ride that he'd rather not do in afternoon heat. There was nothing keeping him in Cutter's Ridge. He stayed anyway. He told himself it was practical. The left front shoe on his horse had been bothering him slightly, and it made sense to have the farrier look at it before a long climb. He told himself that was the reason. He walked the town in the way he'd always moved through places, observing without participating, cataloging without engaging. He noticed who owned what, who owed favors to whom, who was building, and who was struggling. He noticed the way certain men's eyes moved when Lillian Hartwell walked past, and the way those same men's eyes moved differently when Sarah Dawson did. He went into the saloon at midday for coffee, which was the only establishment that would serve it at that hour, without requiring a meal, and sat at the bar. The man next to him was in his late 40s, heavy-set, with the red face of someone who'd been having morning drinks for long enough that he no longer noticed it. He had opinions. He shared them with Ethan the way men share opinions with strangers in saloons, without preamble, without invitation, as though continuing a conversation already in progress. "You see that woman who runs the butcher shop down on 2nd?" the man said. "I've seen her," Ethan said. "Moved here 3 years ago from up north somewhere. No husband, no family, just set up shop like she had every right to." The man shook his head. "Council's been trying to get rid of her for 2 years. Hartwell wants her lot for his warehouse expansion. But she won't sell, won't move, won't do anything the right way." "Whose right way?" Ethan said. The man looked at him sideways. "Well, the town's." "What did she do?" "What do you mean, what did she do?" "She..." The man floundered slightly. "She doesn't fit. Plain as that. Woman like that in a business like that alone, it's not what Cutter's Ridge is building toward. We're a civilized community." Ethan turned the coffee cup in his hands. "She keeps a clean shop. Far as I know. Pays her bills. Pays them on time from what I hear. Hale complains she haggles too hard. Works hard. Lord, yes, I'll give her that. Up before dawn, doesn't stop till dark." The man said it as though it were almost a point against her. Ethan set down his cup. "Sounds like exactly what a civilized community ought to want," he said. He left money on the bar and walked out. He found himself back near the butcher shop in the late afternoon without having consciously decided to go there. The shop was small and tidy. From the outside, freshly painted signage tools hung in careful order by the door. The smell that came from inside, sharp and functional rather than unpleasant to anyone who had actually spent time around livestock and honest work. Through the open side door he could hear the rhythm of a knife on a block. Steady, methodical, professional. He knocked on the door frame. The rhythm stopped. A moment. Then Sarah appeared in the doorway, a cloth in her hand, wiping it clean the way she always seemed to be in the process of some useful task. She looked at him without surprise, which he appreciated. "You're still here," she said. "Farrier," he said. She looked at him the way people look when they've decided not to call someone on a partial truth. "You want something?" "How long has Hartwell been after your lot?" She was quiet for a moment. 2 years, give or take. "Why?" Because he mentioned the council, and council votes don't happen on their own. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, the cloth still in her hand. I know what he's doing. I have a lawyer in Abilene who knows too. But things move slow. They can be slowed down further, Ethan said. She studied him. Why would you care about that? You're leaving tomorrow. Today, he said. I was leaving today. She looked at him. But he didn't answer that directly. He said, if Hartwell pushes a council vote on your operating license while you're not in the room, you lose it by default. Has your lawyer told you that? He has. Then you need someone in the room. I need a lot of things, she said. What I don't need is a man I met yesterday deciding to involve himself in my business because he feels sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for you, Ethan said. And he said it plainly enough that she went still for a moment, searching his face. You're the most competent person I've seen in this town. I don't feel sorry for competent people. The cloth stopped moving in her hands. Then what do you feel? She said. Her voice was careful, not soft. She was asking a real question, not a romantic one, wanting a real answer. Ethan thought about it honestly, the way he thought about all things, without decoration. Respect, he said. And I'm not passing through it on my way to anything else. The silence that followed was not an empty one. It was the kind that holds something not tender, not fragile, but solid. The kind of silence between two people who don't waste words and are deciding together whether more need to be spent. Finally, Sarah unfolded her arms. Council meets Thursday, she said. That's 3 days. I know, Ethan said. You don't owe me anything. No, he agreed. She looked at him for another long moment. The evening light was shifting, and inside the shop, the block and the knives and the ordered tools of her life's work were waiting for her to come back to them. Everything she had built alone. Everything the town had decided she shouldn't be allowed to keep. I make a decent supper, she said. If you're staying another night. Something shifted in Ethan's chest. Not a large thing. Just a small unlocking, like a shutter opened for the first time in a long season. I'll bring the coffee, he said. She nodded once, stepped back inside. The sound of the knife on the block resumed, steady, deliberate, unbroken, and Ethan Cole stood in the doorway of a butcher shop in a town that didn't want either of them listening to the sound of a woman who didn't stop working and felt for the first time in 5 years no particular need to leave. Supper at Sarah Dawson's place wasn't what Ethan had expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he had expected. The table was small, pushed against the wall to make room for everything else. The shelves of preserved stock. The tools hung in deliberate order, the ledger open on the side counter, with numbers written in a tight, economical hand. She ran her life the way she ran her shop. Nothing wasted, nothing out of place, no space given over to things that didn't earn it. She put a plate in front of him, without ceremony. Beef potatoes, something with onion that had been cooked down until it was almost a sauce. He ate it the way he ate everything on the mountain, quietly paying attention, because a man who didn't notice what he was eating usually didn't notice a lot of other things either. And that kind of inattention cost you eventually. You cook like someone who's been feeding themselves a long time, he said. Since I was 11, she said. She sat down across from him with her own plate and ate without the small performances that women in town tended to put on when they had a man at the table. The careful bites, the conversation started, and then demurred the managing of impressions. She just ate. Your parents, he said. Mother died when I was 9. Father lasted 2 more years. She said it straight, no reaching for sympathy. I had an uncle in Kansas who took me in, taught me the trade. He died 4 years ago and left me the equipment and about $60. That's what you started with. That and a lot of practice. She looked up. You. Parents are still alive. Colorado. I haven't been back in 8 years. She looked at him with that measuring quality she had, not cold, just precise, like she was reading something and wanted to get it right. What happened? Nothing dramatic, he said. I just realized I didn't fit there and stopped pretending I did. So you went up a mountain instead. The mountain doesn't ask you to be anything other than what you are, he said. She was quiet for a moment after that. Not the quiet of someone who didn't have anything to say, but the quiet of someone who'd just heard something they were filing away carefully. No, she said finally. I suppose it doesn't. They finished supper. She poured coffee. Real coffee, not the watered-down version the boarding house had served, and they sat with it at the table while the evening settled fully into night outside. Somewhere down the street, music had started up at the saloon fiddle, and laughter, the sounds of a town enjoying itself at a safe distance from both of them. Tell me about the council vote, Ethan said. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Hartwell wants my lot. It runs alongside his warehouse property, and if he has it, he can expand his loading operation and handle twice the freight volume. He offered me $800 2 years ago. I told him no. He came back with $1,000. I told him no again. She paused. He stopped offering after that. And started pushing on the license instead, Ethan said. He has 2 council members in his pocket already. Greer from the mill and a man named Putnam who handles land assessments. He needs a 3rd vote to make it a majority. The 3rd seat is held by a man named Chester Webb, runs the feed store. Webb's an honest enough man, but he's also got 2 sons who work for Hartwell's freight company. She said it without inflection, but she didn't have to put inflection on it. The shape of the trap was clear enough. Who else knows about this? Ethan said. My lawyer knows. He filed an injunction last month, but it only holds until the end of the quarter. If Hartwell pushes the vote before then... She stopped. Then flatly, I lose the license. Without the license, I can't operate. Without operating, I can't pay the property note, and then I lose the property. Ethan turned his coffee cup once in his hands. What's Hartwell's timeline? I don't know exactly, but he's been pressing Webb hard lately. People talk. Her mouth went thin. This town talks about everything except the things that actually matter. Ethan looked at her. You haven't told anyone else about this. Who would I tell? It wasn't self-pitying, it was just accurate. The women in town don't talk to me unless they need something cut. The men either work for Hartwell or are afraid of him. The preacher means well, but he's got the backbone of a wet newspaper. She picked up her cup. I handle my own business. You do, Ethan said, but you don't always have to. She set the cup down, looked at him directly. You've been in town 2 days, Cole. I appreciate what you did this morning with Lillian. I appreciate the supper conversation. But I'm not a woman who takes in strays. He didn't react to that, not defensively, not with offense. He just let it sit. Then he said, I'm not stray. I know exactly where I am. Another silence. A different kind than the ones before this one had more edge to it. The edge of 2 people who were both too direct for comfortable misunderstanding, working out what the other one meant. Why Thursday? She said finally. You said the council meets Thursday. That's 3 days. There are things that can be done in 3 days. Such as having a conversation with Chester Webb that has nothing to do with Hartwell, but gives the man a reason to think twice before he puts his hand up. Ethan put the cup down. And pulling the land assessment records from the county office. If Putnam has been fudging assessments to make your lot look more valuable on paper, then it is that's fraud. And fraud has a way of making men nervous right around the time they were planning to vote. Sarah went still. Not the stillness of surprise exactly, more the stillness of someone hearing a thing said plainly that they had been thinking around the edges of for months. You'd do that, she said. Go look at records, talk to Webb. It's 3 days, he said. I've spent 3 days doing worse for less reason. She studied him for a long time. Long enough that he held her gaze without rushing her, without filling the silence with anything that would have made it easier for either of them. He had learned on the mountain that the most important things usually happened in the moments when you resisted the impulse to say something. Finally, she said, What do you want from this, Ethan? He thought about the honest answer. The mountain had made him honest almost past the point of social comfort. He said, I don't know yet, but I know I don't want to ride away from this town in 3 days and spend the next 5 years wondering what happened to you. The words landed in the room differently than he'd expected them to. Not soft. Nothing between them was soft but true, in a way that seemed to shift the air slightly. Sarah looked at him with those steady dark eyes, and for just a moment, the careful guard she wore like a second skin slipped enough that he saw what was underneath it. Not softness, not vulnerability in the frail sense, but the specific exhaustion of a person who had been entirely alone in something for a very long time, and had almost stopped noticing the weight of it. "All right," she said. 3 days. He nodded once. She picked up her cup. The fiddle music from the saloon drifted in through the window cracks high and lonesome, and neither of them mentioned it. He was at the county land office when it opened at 8 o'clock the next morning. The clerk was a young man named Aldous, with ink-stained cuffs and the harried look of someone perpetually behind on filing. He was not difficult to work with. Ethan asked for the assessment records on the lots along 2nd Street, and Aldous produced them without question, because they were public records, and because something in Ethan's manner didn't invite the question of why. Ethan sat at the side table with the records for 90 minutes. What he found took him 40 of those minutes. The remaining 50 he spent making sure he understood what he was seeing. Putnam had been creative. The assessment on Sarah's lot had been revised upward 3 times in 2 years, each revision accompanied by a written justification that on the surface referenced legitimate factors. Proximity to the freight corridor increased. Commercial traffic improved road access. But the comparable lots along the same block hadn't received the same revisions. And one of those comparable lots, a vacant parcel that Hartwell had purchased 6 months ago, had been assessed downward in the same period using language that was almost the mirror image of what Putnam had written for Sarah's lot. It wasn't subtle exactly. It was the work of a man who expected no one to look. Ethan copied the relevant numbers in his own hand, noted the dates, folded the paper, and put it in his coat pocket. He thanked Aldous and walked out into the morning heat. Chester Webb's feed store was 3 blocks east. Ethan went there next. Webb was a compact, deliberate man in his early 60s, with the unhurried quality of someone who had built his business slowly and on purpose. He was stacking seed bags near the back when Ethan came in. He looked up, recognized the stranger's face from the edges of the last 2 days, and kept stacking. "Help you with something," he said. "I'm Ethan Cole. I've been in town a few days. I know who you are." Webb kept working. Not unfriendly, just a man who didn't stop moving because a conversation had started. "You've been spending time over at the butcher shop." "I have." Webb set a bag down and straightened his back. Looked at Ethan squarely. "She's a good woman, hard worker, doesn't deserve what's being done to her." He said it clearly, like a man who knew where he stood and didn't care who knew it. "But my boys work for Hartwell's operation. I've got 2 grandchildren and their mothers to think about." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I'm talking to you instead of assuming." Webb's eyes sharpened slightly. "You're not here to threaten me." "No." "Or bribe me." "No." Ethan pulled the folded paper from his pocket and held it out. "I'm here to show you what Putnam has been doing with the land assessments and let you decide what to do with it." Webb took the paper. Read it standing up, which told Ethan he was a man who didn't need to sit down to think. The reading took about 2 minutes, and in those 2 minutes his expression moved through several things: skepticism, attention, recognition, and then something that settled into the particular grimness of a man who had been hoping not to see exactly what he was seeing. "This is county record," he said. "Public record. I copied it this morning. If Putnam finds out you've been pulling records—" "He'll find out," Ethan said. "That's fine." Webb folded the paper slowly and held it against his leg. He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want me to do with this?" "Nothing, if that's what you decide," Ethan said. "Or you could take it to the circuit judge's office in Abilene. Or you could simply not be in the room when Hartwell calls his vote Thursday." He paused. "I'm not asking you to put yourself in the line of anything. I'm asking you to not add your name to something that's going to look very different 6 months from now." Webb looked at him steadily. "You're not from here." "No." But you're involving yourself in this. Yes. Why? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, because somebody should. Webb turned the folded paper over in his hands once. Then he held it back out to Ethan. Keep your copy, he said. I've got a good memory. Ethan took it back. They looked at each other across the feed bags in the quiet of the morning store, two men who understood each other well enough in a short amount of time. Then Webb picked up the next seed bag and started working again, and Ethan walked back out into the summer heat.
Narrated.
He didn't tell Sarah everything right away. Not because he was hiding anything, but because the information wasn't fully useful yet, and he had learned not to lay tools out before you needed them. He spent that second afternoon around the shop, not inside it. He wasn't the kind of man who hovered, but near enough. He repaired a section of the loading dock that had a soft plank because it was there and needed doing. He replaced the rope on her barrel winch with the new rope from his order, which was stronger and wouldn't fray the same way. Small things, practical things. Sarah came out at one point and looked at the repaired plank and then at him. I didn't ask for that, she said. No, he agreed. She watched him work for a moment. You're a man who does things without being asked. Things that need doing, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, most men who do things for me expect something back. He kept working. I know, he said. I'm not most men. She went back inside. 15 minutes later, she brought him water without being asked, set it on the dock railing where he could reach it, and went back inside again without a word. He drank it and kept working and didn't make anything of it, which was exactly the right thing to do. The trouble came that evening, as trouble in small towns usually does sideways and with company. Ethan was at the boarding house writing a letter to his contact at the land office in the county seat, a man he'd done some survey work for years back who still owed him a favor when he heard the voices in the street. Not a crowd exactly, but more than a few people, and carrying that particular pitch that meant something was happening that they'd come to watch rather than stop. He went to the window. 3 men were outside the butcher shop. Not Hartwell. He wouldn't come himself for something like this, which said something about him. But men who worked for him, a large man named Dobbins, who ran the freight yard, and 2 others Ethan had seen around the loading docks. They were standing at Sarah's door, and Dobbins was talking loudly enough to carry to the street, which was the point. Sarah was in the doorway. She had her arms folded and her chin up, and she was listening with the expression of someone who had heard this before and wasn't afraid of it, but was aware of exactly how alone she was. Ethan was down the stairs and across the street in under a minute. Evening, he said. Dobbins turned. He was a big man, which he was accustomed to using as an argument before he'd said a word. He looked at Ethan the way men like him look at men who walk into situations they didn't invite them into, with contempt that was already preparing to turn into something else if necessary. This is a private conversation, Dobbins said. Doesn't look private, Ethan said. There are 12 people watching it from the street. Dobbins glanced at the watchers. Miss Dawson and I are just having a conversation about her future plans for the property. That right? Ethan looked at Sarah. She gave him a brief look. Not rescue me, not thank you, just I see you. He looked back at Dobbins. She say she wanted to have that conversation tonight. I'm representing Mr. Hartwell's. I didn't ask who you're representing, Ethan said. I asked if she said she wanted to have this conversation. Dobbins took a step forward. He was used to that working. You want to be real careful about what you're putting yourself in the middle of, friend. We're not friends, Ethan said. He said it without heat, without threat, just with precision, the way you correct a factual error. And I'm not in the middle of anything. I'm standing on a public street outside a legal business with a woman who didn't invite you. He held Dobbins's eyes. Didn't blink. Didn't shift. The mountain had made him very still in situations that required it. So you can go back and tell Hartwell you delivered his message, or we can stand here until your legs get tired. Either way works for me. The 2 men behind Dobbins were looking at each other the way men do when the situation has stopped matching the script they came with. Dobbins looked at Ethan for a long moment, measuring, recalculating. He was a man who understood force, and could see that the man in front of him understood it also, but differently, with a kind of patience that was harder to push against than anger. "This ain't over," Dobbins said. "Didn't say it was," Ethan said. Dobbins turned and walked away, and his 2 men went with him. The 12 watchers on the street found reasons to look elsewhere. The street settled back into its evening sounds, the horses, the distant fiddle, the creak of a sign in the summer wind. Sarah let out a slow breath beside him. Not a shaky breath, controlled, deliberate. The breath of someone releasing a thing they had been holding very carefully. "He's going to come back," she said. "Probably," Ethan said. "Or send someone worse." "Probably," he said again. She looked at him. "That doesn't bother you?" "Not particularly." He turned toward her. "What Hartwell is doing is going to look like what it is before Thursday. Dobbins showing up outside your door tonight is part of the same pattern, pressure, intimidation, isolation. If you write down what just happened, time and witnesses included, and send it to your lawyer tonight, it becomes a piece of evidence, harassment. That changes the legal picture." She blinked once, and in that blink, he could see the shift from the raw place, the shaken place, back to the place she was most comfortable. Action. Something to do. A tool she could use. "I have paper in the shop," she said. "Then let's write it down," he said. They went inside. She lit the lamp and found paper, and Ethan sat across from her, and they documented what had happened. Who, what time, what was said, how many witnesses. She wrote it in that tight, sure hand of hers. He read it over when she finished and said, "Add that Dobbins stated he was representing Hartwell specifically. That establishes the connection." She added it, folded the paper, looked up at him. "My lawyer will need this by tomorrow morning's post." "The post office opens at 7, Ethan said. She nodded. Then she was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in the quality of her quiet, not softening exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement, something that cost her something to show. "I've been fighting this for 2 years, she said. "Alone. And in 3 days, you've—" She stopped. "You did the hard part," he said. "You held it. I'm just adding a direction." She looked at him for a long time. "Why does that matter to you?" she said. "Truly. Not the logical answer. The true one." He was quiet. On the mountain, he had gotten used to not having to answer questions about himself because there was no one to ask them. The question sat in the lamplight between them, patient and direct, the way she was patient and direct. "Because I spent 5 years watching things from the side of a mountain," he said finally. "And I think I did that long enough." She held his gaze. And this time when the silence came, it wasn't the silence of 2 people deciding whether to trust each other. It was the silence of 2 people who had already decided, feeling the weight of what that meant. The next morning, she was at the post office at 7, and he was beside her. The clerk, a young woman named Marta, looked at the 2 of them together with the sharp cataloging attention of a person who reported to no formal authority but distributed information with great efficiency. Ethan watched her watch them and said nothing about it because it didn't matter. Let the town look. That was its own kind of message. They walked back up the street together in the early heat. Cutter's Ridge was waking itself up, wagons moving, the smell of breakfast from the boarding house, 2 children chasing each other across the alley between the dry goods store and the telegraph office. It looked for all the world like a simple and ordinary town. Ethan had known enough simple and ordinary towns to understand exactly how misleading that was. "Hartwell will hear we mailed something this morning," Sarah said. "He'll hear it before noon," Ethan said. "Good. Good." She looked sideways at him. "If he thinks you've escalated, he'll move faster. If he moves faster, he makes mistakes. Careful, slow corruption is hard to prove. Rushed corruption leaves things in drawers that shouldn't be there." She considered this. "You've dealt with men like him before. Different versions," he said. "Same mechanism. They believe they're the only ones willing to plan ahead. They stop accounting for people who also plan ahead." She was quiet for a stride or 2. Then, and what's the plan ahead? He'd been working on that since the conversation with Webb. Thursday morning before the council session, you need to be in that chamber, not waiting outside inside, already seated, with your lawyer's filed injunction visible on the table and the assessment records I copied laid next to it. He paused. Hartwell will have warned Greer and Putnam that you're a problem. But seeing you sitting there already prepared with documentation they didn't know you had, that changes the calculation for Putnam specifically. Putnam is protecting himself. Give him a reason to protect himself differently, and he might. You think he'd flip? I think a man facing fraud charges votes differently than a man who thinks he's safe, Ethan said. And I think Putnam isn't fully sure how much we know. Sarah stopped walking. He stopped a half step later and turned. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her yet. Not the measuring look, not the guarded look, not the look that meant she was deciding whether to trust him. This was something quieter, something that hadn't quite found its name yet. You didn't have to stay, she said. No? He said. You could have ridden out yesterday morning. Nothing stopping you. That's right. But you're here. Planning council strategy at 7 in the morning and repairing my loading dock and standing between me and Hartwell's men. Her voice was careful, but not guarded. It was the voice of a woman who was saying a hard thing because she'd decided honesty mattered more than protection. That's not nothing, Ethan. That's something, and I need to know what it means. Not later. Now. He looked at her in the morning light. This woman who worked before dawn and kept perfect accounts and didn't perform for anyone, and hadn't asked him to stay, but hadn't asked him to go either. He thought about the mountain which was real and waiting, and had given him exactly what he'd gone up there for: space. Silence, the clean logic of survival. He thought about riding back up to it, and being there again alone in the long quiet that had started to feel less like peace and more like absence. He said, "It means I think you're the most real person I've been in a room with in 5 years, and I'm not ready to stop being in the same room as you." Sarah didn't look away. She didn't fill the moment with anything smaller than it was. She stood with it the way she stood with everything still and straight and fully present. "Thursday first," she said. "Thursday first," he agreed. She turned and kept walking toward the shop, and he fell into step beside her, and the morning heat rose around them both, and Cutter's Ridge went about its ordinary business completely unaware that in 3 days everything it had decided about Sarah Dawson was going to be put to the test, and that for the first time in 2 years she wasn't going to be standing there alone when it was. That afternoon, Lillian Hartwell came to the shop. Not with her composed smile this time. Not with the patient contempt voice or the careful posture. She came in through the front door, which she had never done before, and she stood in the middle of the small space with her clean hands at her sides and her face stripped of performance, and she looked at Sarah with something that was almost honest. Almost. "I want to talk to you," she said. "Without him." Sarah was at the counter. "He's not here," she said. Which was true. Ethan had gone to the telegraph office to send a message to the county seat. Lillian looked around the shop, checking anyway. Then she looked back at Sarah. "You need to stop this." "Stop what?" Sarah said. "Whatever you think you're doing. Involving that man in father's business. Getting lawyers and records and—" She stopped. Her composure was back in partial measure, but it wasn't sitting right. Underneath it she was something Ethan would not have recognized in her, but Sarah recognized immediately, because she had felt it herself too many times to mistake it afraid. "You don't understand what he can do. Your father—" Sarah kept her voice even. "I've got a pretty good idea. He won't stop at the license." Lillian's voice dropped. "He's talked to men in the county seat. Men who can make things very difficult for people who make things difficult for him." She stopped again, and in the stop, Sarah heard something she hadn't expected, a warning given at a cost. "I'm not saying this to threaten you. I'm saying it because I'm saying it." Sarah put down what she was holding. She looked at Lillian. Hartwell truly looked at her the way she hadn't bothered to before, because Lillian had never given her a reason to look past the performance. What she saw surprised her slightly. Not a villain, not a good person either. A woman who had been shaped entirely by a world that rewarded her for being decorative and obedient and afraid, and who had not yet found a reason to be anything else. "Why are you telling me?" Sarah said. Lillian looked at the counter, at her own hands. "Because what Father is doing is wrong," she said. And then quieter. "Because Ethan Cole looked at me like I was in the way, and looked at you like you were the reason he was standing in a particular place. And I have never, in my entire life—" She stopped, set her jaw. "I have never had a man look at me the way he looks at you." The silence was unexpected. Sarah didn't know what to do with it. She didn't think Lillian did either. "What do you want me to do with this?" Sarah said finally. "I don't know," Lillian said, and the honesty of it was almost startling. "I just be careful, that's all." She turned toward the door. Then she stopped with her hand on the frame. "He won't forgive me for coming here if he finds out." "Then don't let him find out," Sarah said. Lillian nodded once without looking back. And then she was gone, and the shop was quiet again, and Sarah stood in the middle of it with the unexpected weight of a warning from the last place she would have thought to look. When Ethan came back 20 minutes later, she told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's right that he has contacts at the county seat." "Does that change things?" He thought about it. "It means we move faster than I planned." He met her eyes. "And it means we need one more piece before Thursday. Something that doesn't just defend your license, something that goes on offense." Sarah looked at him. "What kind of offense?" "The kind," Ethan said, "that makes Hartwell realize the cost of continuing is higher than the cost of walking away." The lamp between them threw long shadows against the wall, and outside the summer evening pressed down on Cutter's Ridge hot and still, the way it always was just before a storm. He spent that night at the telegraph office waiting for a reply that didn't come until nearly midnight. Ethan had sent 2 messages to the county seat. One to his old contact at the land office, a man named Ferris, who owed him a favor from a boundary survey job 3 years back, and who, more importantly, had access to records that weren't public, and didn't require a clerk named Aldous to pull them. The second message went to a federal land agent named Calhoun, who operated out of Abilene, and who Ethan had crossed paths with twice, once on a trail dispute in the hill country, and once on something worse that neither of them talked about, but that had established between them a kind of trust that didn't require friendship. The reply from Ferris came first. Short. Efficient. It said, "Pattern matches 2 prior complaints. Dismissed. No follow-through. We'll pull the full file." Ethan read it twice, folded it into his coat pocket, and waited. Calhoun's reply came 40 minutes later, even shorter. It said, "Recognize the name. Expected your message sooner. Will ride Thursday." Ethan walked back to the boarding house in the full dark of the summer night, the heat still sitting heavy in the air even past midnight, and he turned over what he had in his mind, the way he turned over gear before a long climb, checking each piece for weight, for necessity, for the specific function it served. What he had was almost enough. What he needed was one more thing, and it was the hardest thing to get, because it wasn't a document, or a record, or a favor. It was a person, and the person was Lillian Hartwell. He was up before dawn. He dressed, drank the bad coffee from the boarding house kitchen, and walked to the one place in Cutter's Ridge that opened before the rest of the town, and saw everything. The bakery run by a woman named Clara Sims, who had been in the town since before the freight road went in, and who noticed, cataloged, and retained information about her neighbors with the precision of a professional archivist. He had spoken to her only briefly in the days he'd been in town, but he had watched her, and what he'd watched had told him what he needed to know. He sat at the counter with coffee and a piece of cornbread and said, "I need to know something about Hartwell's operation, and I need to know it before 7. Clara Sims looked at him over the rim of her own cup. She was a small woman in her 60s, with eyes that had seen everything at least twice and were not impressed by any of it. "Do you," she said, "who handles his bookkeeping?" She was quiet for a moment, turning her cup. "Why would I know that?" Because you've been here 14 years, and you make the bread that goes to every household on this street, including his, Ethan said. And because you're a careful woman. She looked at him steadily. Then, young man named Pryor, Timothy Pryor, came from the land office in Carson 2 years ago. He's a nervous type, eats 4 cups of coffee before 10, and keeps his ledgers in a leather satchel he doesn't let out of his sight. She paused. He comes in every morning at 6:45, sits at the far table, doesn't talk much. What does he talk about when he does? Ethan said. Clara picked up a cloth and wiped down the already clean counter. He talks about wanting to go back east, she said. He talks about how he didn't think the job would be what it turned out to be. He talks about his mother in Pennsylvania in a way that tells you he misses her considerably. She stopped wiping, looked at him. He's not a bad young man. He's a young man who made a choice and is finding out what that choice costs. Thank you, Ethan said. Don't thank me, she said. Just make sure whatever you're doing actually helps that Dawson woman. She orders her meat from butchers 3 towns over because she won't buy from herself, and she brings me a cut of venison every fall, whether I ask for it or not. Clara set the cloth down. She's good people. This town has been ugly to her, and it ought to be ashamed of itself. Ethan paid for the coffee and the cornbread and sat at the far table to wait. Timothy Pryor came in at 6:43, which already told Ethan something about him. A man who arrived 2 minutes early to his only reliable daily piece was a man running from something, and running hard. He was young, mid-20s, with the pale, slightly compressed look of someone who had been carrying a stress too big for his frame. He set his satchel on the table in his hand before he even sat down. Clara brought his coffee without being asked. Ethan gave him 4 minutes, then he moved to the table. Mind if I sit? Pryor looked up. His eyes went to Ethan's face, then to the door, then back. I know. Go ahead. Ethan sat, put both hands on the table, visible, unhurried. My name is Ethan Cole. I've been in town a few days. I know who you are, Pryor said. His voice was careful, controlled. Mr. Hartwell mentioned you. Did he? He said you were involving yourself in things that aren't your business. He's partially right, Ethan said. They weren't my business when I rode into town. They are now. He paused. You know what I've been looking at? The assessment records. Something moved across Pryor's face, quick, controlled, but there. He picked up his coffee. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, Ethan said. Not unkind, not threatening, just accurate. You keep the books for Hartwell's operation. That means you know what Putnam assessed Sarah Dawson's lot at, and what he assessed the vacant parcel at, and what the actual market comparables were. You know it because it went through your accounts. He let that sit for a moment. I'm not here to put anything on you, Pryor. I'm here because a federal land agent named Calhoun is riding into Cutter's Ridge on Thursday morning, and I want you to know that before he arrives. The coffee cup stopped halfway to Pryor's mouth. Calhoun, Ethan said, works fraud cases. Property fraud assessment, manipulation, license interference used to coerce property sales. He's been working a pattern of cases across 4 counties that look a great deal like what's been happening here. He let that land. Then, when he pulls the books, and he will pull the books, the question of who knew what and when becomes the most important question in the room. Men who came forward before the investigation closed have historically fared considerably better than men who waited. Pryor set the cup down. His hands were very steady, which told Ethan he was working hard to make them that way. You're telling me to... I'm telling you nothing, Ethan said. I'm giving you information. What you do with it is entirely your decision. He stood. But you've got until Thursday morning, and I think you already know which side of this you want to be on. He left Pryor sitting at the table with his satchel in his hand and his coffee going cold, and a decision that had probably been building in him for 2 years, finally arriving at its due date. He found Sarah at the shop before 7, which was not unusual, She was always there before 7. She was working through the morning orders, moving with the practiced efficiency that he had come to recognize as her baseline state-focused economical, nothing wasted. She looked up when he came in and read something in his face. "Tell me," she said. He told her about Ferris, about Calhoun, about Pryor. She listened, the way she always listened, fully, without interrupting, without the nervous filler questions that most people used to prove they were paying attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You've been moving fast," she said. "We had 3 days," he said. "Now we have 1. She set down the knife she'd been holding. "Calhoun showing up Thursday, that changes the council meeting." "That's the point," Ethan said. "Hartwell planned that meeting as the final move. His men is vote your license gone before your lawyer's injunction can do anything. But if there's a federal agent in town that morning, every man in that chamber is going to be doing the same calculation. Do I want my name on a vote that a fraud investigator is going to be looking at before the ink's dry?" Sarah's eyes moved through that, following the logic. "Greer might hold. He's deep enough in Hartwell's pocket that he's not thinking about anything else." "Greer holds," Ethan agreed. "Putnam breaks, and Webb was never going to vote against me," Sarah said quietly. "He told me, 6 months ago. He said he'd find a reason to miss the session if it came to a vote." She looked at the counter. He was the only one. Something shifted in Ethan's chest at that, not surprise, but the specific kind of anger that comes from seeing a picture fully assembled for the first time. She had known for 6 months that one aging man with grandchildren who worked for her enemy was the closest thing she had to an ally in this town. And she had kept working. Kept the books, kept the shop, kept showing up every morning before 7. "You didn't tell me that," he said. "You didn't ask," she said, and then more quietly, "I didn't want you to think it was more hopeless than it already looked." He looked at her. "You were protecting me from it." "I was." She stopped, looked at him with something that was halfway between frustration and something too honest for either of them to look at directly. "I don't know what I was doing. I'm not accustomed to having someone to tell things to." The shop was quiet around them. Outside, the day was already building its heat. Ethan stayed with what she'd said, and didn't rush past it because it deserved not to be rushed past. "You have someone now," he said. She picked up the knife again, not to avoid the moment he understood by now that her hands needed to work the way other people needed to breathe. "I know," she said. What neither of them had accounted for was Hartwell moving Wednesday. He found out about Calhoun. Ethan didn't know how. Maybe through someone at the telegraph office, maybe through Pryor, maybe through the general reality that small towns were membranes through which information moved faster than horses. And he moved with the decisiveness of a man who understood that a problem not eliminated now became a much larger problem later. Ethan was at the feed store talking to Webb when he heard the commotion. Not loud, more like the quality of the town's noise changing the way sound changes when people are watching something and aren't sure whether to intervene. He was out the door in 2 steps. Down the street in front of Sarah's shop, Dobbins was back. This time he hadn't come alone, and he hadn't come to talk. He had 2 men with him and a paper in his hand, and he was nailing something to the front of the shop door with the methodical efficiency of a man following an instruction he'd been given clearly and didn't mind carrying out. Sarah was in the doorway. She was trying to take the paper. Dobbins was holding it out of reach with his left hand while his right hand drove the nail. Ethan covered the distance at a pace that was not quite running, but was faster than walking, because running in a town street meant panic, and panic meant you'd already lost something. He came up behind Dobbins and said at a volume that carried, "What are you posting?" Dobbins turned. The paper was half nailed to the door. "Violation notice," he said. "From the council, operating license suspended pending review." "The council hasn't met," Ethan said. "Emergency session," Dobbins said. "Called this morning. Majority vote." He held up the paper. 3 signatures. Ethan looked at it. Greer, Putnam. And a name he hadn't seen before, a man named Aldrich, who apparently held a 4th council seat that nobody had mentioned. He looked at Sarah. Her face was very still, the specific stillness of someone absorbing a hit and staying upright. "Who's Aldrich?" Ethan said to her. "Hartwell's brother-in-law," she said. Her voice was flat. "I didn't know he was on the council. He was appointed last month. I didn't—" She stopped. The admission cost her something. She hadn't known about the fourth seat. Neither had he. It meant the vote had already happened, and it had been 3-1 regardless of Webb. Dobbins finished driving the nail, straightened up, looked at Ethan with the satisfied expression of a man who had come to deliver a message and was enjoying the delivery. "She's got 24 hours to cease operations," he said. "After that, the marshal gets involved." He left. His 2 men went with him, and Sarah stood at the door of her shop with a violation notice nailed to it and the specific terrible clarity of a person who has been outmaneuvered by someone who had more time and more resources and had simply been waiting for the right moment to use them. The people on the street who had watched went back to their business. That was the worst part, Ethan thought. Not the notice, not Dobbins, but the watching and going back to business. The town's practiced comfortable indifference to what was being done to this woman in plain sight. He reached past her and pulled the nail out of the door with 2 fingers and took the notice off, folded it, put it in his pocket. "Come inside," he said. She didn't argue. She went in. He followed and closed the door. She stood in the middle of the shop with her arms at her sides and her hands open, and she was the most controlled person he had ever seen in a moment that would have unmade most people. But her breathing was careful, and he could see in the set of her shoulders the effort that control was costing. "He knew about Calhoun," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "So he moved the vote up. Yesterday or this morning, before Calhoun could arrive and change the calculation." "Yes." "And now I'm suspended, and I've got 24 hours, and Calhoun arrives Thursday, which is—" She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "Tomorrow morning. And in 24 hours from now, it'll be Thursday morning, and the damage will already be done." "Not necessarily," Ethan said. She looked at him. Not with hope. She was not a woman who reached for hope when it wasn't earned. With the precise attention of someone who needed to know if what they were hearing was solid ground or wishful thinking. "The emergency session this morning," he said. "Did you receive notice?" "No." "Were you informed of the meeting?" "No." "Were you given the opportunity to appear and contest?" Her eyes sharpened. "No." "Then the vote is procedurally invalid," Ethan said. "An emergency session requires 24 hours notice to all affected parties. If they didn't notify you, the vote can be challenged and suspended." He paused. "But we need to challenge it before 24 hours is up, which means we need to file tonight. My lawyer is in Abilene." "Is there a telegraph?" She looked at him for just a moment, and in that moment something happened that he would not have been able to describe precisely, but felt a door opening somewhere that had been closed for a long time. Not toward him specifically. Toward the possibility that she did not have to hold every single thing alone. "Yes," she said. "There's a telegraph. Then let's send him the notice and the procedural grounds and give him something to file tonight." He moved toward the door. "But first—" He stopped, turned back, looked at her across the shop, across the knives and the block and the ordered tools of everything she had built. "I need you to hear something." She looked at him. "This isn't over," he said. "What they did this morning is exactly the move of a man who's cornered. Cornered men make mistakes. Hartwell doesn't know about Pryor. He doesn't know what Ferris is pulling from the county records. And he doesn't know that Calhoun isn't just riding to look, he's riding because I told him what he'd find when he got here." He held her eyes. "They won a round today. That's not the fight." She looked at him for a long time. Something moved in her face through the control, through the exhaustion, through the 2 years of fighting alone. It wasn't tears, and it wasn't weakness. It was something more honest than either the specific look of a person who has been told the truth by someone who means it, and is deciding whether they're strong enough to believe it. "All right," she said. They went to the telegraph office. The message to her lawyer, a man named Beaumont, who, as it turned out, had been waiting for exactly this kind of escalation and had the procedural challenge half-drafted, already went out at 4 in the afternoon. His reply came at 6. He would file by morning. The emergency session vote, given the failure to notify, was challengeable under territorial council procedures. He had already been in contact with the circuit judge's office. The circuit judge. Ethan read the telegram twice. He hadn't known Beaumont had that contact. He looked at Sarah. "You didn't tell me he was talking to the circuit judge," he said. "I didn't know until now," she said. She was reading the telegram over his shoulder, and her voice had shifted just slightly, just enough. "He must have filed something I didn't know about." "He filed something on the assessment fraud," Ethan said, reading further. 3 weeks ago, based on the same records I pulled. He got there first." Sarah was quiet. "Your lawyer," Ethan said slowly, "has been building this case for 3 weeks, and Calhoun is riding because he already had a flag on Hartwell's name from whatever Beaumont filed." He looked at her. "You had more in place than you let on." She didn't look away. "I had pieces," she said. "I didn't know how they fit, and I didn't—" She stopped, exhaled. "I didn't let myself believe it was enough, because every time I started to believe it was enough, something else went wrong." He understood that. The way hope becomes dangerous when you've been burned by it enough times. The way a person learns to keep their expectations low as a form of self-protection, even when the evidence is starting to point somewhere better. "It might be enough," he said. "It might," she said. "And if it isn't, then we find the next thing," he said. "But it might be." She looked at the telegram in his hand, then at him. "You don't know me well enough to keep making promises like that." "I'm not making promises," he said. "I'm making plans. There's a difference." He held her gaze. "And I know you well enough." She took the telegram from his hand, folded it, and put it in her apron pocket. She moved toward the door. He thought she was going back to the shop, back to work, which was her answer to everything, and he was going to let her go, because that was what she needed. But she stopped at the door, with her hand on the frame, not looking at him. "I'm going to make supper again," she said. "The same as before. You're welcome to come." A pause, short, deliberate. "I'd rather you came." He looked at her back at the set of her shoulders, at the apron pocket where she'd put the telegram. "What time?" he said. 7, she said. "I'll bring the coffee," he said. She went out. And Ethan Cole stood in the telegraph office with the late afternoon light falling through the window and felt the particular unfamiliar sensation of a man who has spent 5 years making peace with being alone, suddenly, quietly, no longer making peace with it at all. He was at the shop at 7 with the coffee. She had made something with rabbit and dried herbs that smelled like the kind of meal that takes knowledge and intention to produce from limited materials, and they ate it the way they'd eaten the first supper, without performance, without managing impressions, with the specific ease of two people who had agreed somewhere along the way to stop pretending that shared meals were less important than they actually were. "Tell me about the mountain," she said when the food was done and the coffee was poured. He thought about how to answer that. He didn't usually talk about it. It was the kind of place that sounded either self-indulgent or eccentric when described to people who hadn't needed to go somewhere like it. "It's very quiet," he said. "Not the kind of quiet that's just the absence of noise, the kind that has a texture to it, like the air is paying attention." He paused. "The first year was hard. I kept waiting for something to need deciding, some crisis, some demand, and there wasn't one. It was just the mountain and the weather and the work of staying alive. By the second year, I stopped waiting. And by the 5th year," she said. He turned the cup in his hands. "By the 5th year, I knew it was time to come down." "How did you know?" He thought about the honest answer. "Because I wasn't going up anymore," he said. "I was just staying. And there's a difference between choosing a place and hiding in it." She absorbed that. "Were you hiding?" "For part of it," he said. "Yes." She nodded slowly, not judging it, just acknowledging it as a fact the way she acknowledged all facts. "What were you hiding from?" "Everything that requires you to be known by someone," he said. And everything that might break anyway. If you don't. He stopped. Tried again. If you don't start a thing, it can't fall apart. That logic made sense to me for a while. She was looking at him with those steady dark eyes, and the lamplight was between them, and outside Cutter's Ridge was doing whatever Cutter's Ridge did in the evenings, the saloon, the families, the small, ordinary mechanics of a town that considered itself civilized and mostly wasn't. It doesn't make sense anymore, she said. No, he said. It doesn't. She looked at her cup. I understand the impulse, she said. I've done the same thing differently. I work instead. Anything that might require me to be open to something, I fill the space with work. It's safer. Does it work? He said. Mostly, she said. But mostly isn't the same as entirely. She looked up. And I'm getting tired of mostly. The room was very quiet. Not an uncomfortable quiet, the other kind, the kind they had been building between them since the first supper, the kind that held something real. I'm going to be honest with you, she said, because I don't know how to be anything else, and because I think you'd know if I weren't. She set her cup down. Her hands were still. I don't know what this is. What you are to me, or what I might be to you. I've spent 3 years in this town, without letting anyone close enough to matter because every time someone got close, it cost me something. She paused. But I think you're already close enough to matter, and that scares me more than Hartwell does. Ethan didn't look away, didn't rush to reassure her, didn't fill the honest thing she'd said with something smaller. He sat with it the way it deserved to be sat with. It scares me too, he said. And it was true. It was the truest thing he'd said to anyone in 5 years. I didn't come down from that mountain looking for this. Neither of us was looking, she said. No, he said. Another silence. And in it, without any decision being made, without any declaration, the thing between them settled into something more solid, not named, not claimed, just present and acknowledged the way a foundation settles into the earth before you start building on it. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. And then we see. She nodded, picked up her cup. He picked up his. And the night moved on around them, and the one day that remained between this moment and the rest of it sat between them like a held breath. What Ethan did not know, could not have known sitting in that lamplit room with the woman who had become in 4 days the most important reason he'd stayed in a town he'd come to leave, was that by the time Thursday came, Hartwell wouldn't be the only problem. The circuit judge's office had sent a rider that afternoon, and the rider had carried a message that Beaumont would not receive until morning. And the message would change everything that either of them had planned. The message from the circuit judge's office arrived at Beaumont's desk in Abilene at 6 in the morning, and by 7 he had sent a rider to Cutter's Ridge with a sealed letter and a telegram that reached Ethan at the boarding house while he was still pulling on his boots. He read it standing up, then he read it again. The circuit judge had not simply acknowledged Beaumont's filing. He had done something that neither of them had anticipated, something that changed the shape of Thursday entirely. Judge Harold Crane, a man with a reputation for moving slowly on most things, and very fast on anything that touched federal land fraud, had issued a temporary injunction the previous afternoon that superseded the council's emergency vote. The suspension of Sarah's operating license was as of 6 o'clock Wednesday evening itself suspended, legally void. She could open her shop this morning. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. The part that changed everything was the second paragraph. Crane was not sending a representative. He was riding himself. He would arrive in Cutter's Ridge by mid-morning Thursday, and he intended to hold an emergency hearing in the town hall open to the public to examine the conduct of the council and the land assessment records in their entirety. He had subpoenaed 3 names, Putnam Greer and Gerald Hartwell himself. Ethan folded the telegram, put it in his pocket, went to find Sarah. She was already at the shop, already working, because she was always already working. He came through the door, and she looked up and read his face before he said a word. "What happened?" she said. He told her. She listened. And when he got to the part about the judge righting himself, something happened in her face that he had not seen before. Not relief, not triumph, but something underneath both of those, something more fundamental. The specific expression of a person who has been standing in a wind for so long that the moment the wind stops, they almost don't know what to do with their own weight. She sat down on the stool behind the counter, which was notable because he had never once seen her sit down during working hours. "He's coming himself," she said. "Tomorrow morning," Ethan said. She put both hands flat on the counter, looked at them. "I have been—" She stopped, started again. "I have been telling myself for 2 years that if I just held on long enough, if I just kept the books clean and paid on time and did everything right, that it would eventually, that the system would eventually—" She stopped again. Her jaw worked. "I stopped believing that about 6 months ago." "Beaumont didn't stop," Ethan said. "No," she said quietly. "He didn't." She looked up. "And neither did you." He held her gaze. "Neither did you," he said. "That's the part that made any of the rest of it possible." She looked at him for a moment, with something open in her face, unguarded, in a way she almost never was. The tiredness and the relief, and something warmer than either of those moving together under the surface. Then she stood up, squared her shoulders, and picked up the knife she'd set down. "I need to open the shop," she said, and then quietly, "Thank you, Ethan." He nodded once. "I'll be back at noon." He walked out into the morning heat and went to find Calhoun's trail, because the federal agent was riding in today, not tomorrow, and there were things that needed to be said before Thursday's hearing that were better said out of town. He met Calhoun on the South Road, just past the Cottonwood Grove, 2 miles outside of Cutter's Ridge. The agent was a lean man in his late 40s, road-dusted with the kind of face that gave nothing away because it had spent too many years giving things away and suffering the consequences. He pulled up when he saw Ethan and looked at him the way men look at people they know slightly and trust considerably. "You got here fast," Ethan said. "Your telegram wasn't subtle," Calhoun said. "When you say recognized pattern, multiple counties move quickly. I've learned to move quickly." He stepped down from the horse. "Tell me what you have," Ethan told him. "All of it." Putnam's assessment manipulations. Hartwell's pressure on Webb through his sons, the emergency session called without proper notification. Aldrich's undisclosed council seat and the conversation with Pryor. Calhoun listened the way investigators listen without comment, filing things connecting them to things Ethan couldn't see. When Ethan finished, Calhoun said, "Pryor." "Yes." "He knew when you talked to him that he had a decision to make." "He knew?" Ethan said. "I don't know which way he went." Calhoun was quiet for a moment. "Does he know about Crane riding in?" "Not for me." "He'll find out," Calhoun said. "In a town this size, he'll find out by noon." He turned and looked back toward Cutter's Ridge. A man like Pryor carrying 2 years of someone else's fraud in his ledger books, when he finds out the circuit judge is coming, he's either going to disappear or he's going to walk into my hands. Those are the only 2 options for a man in his position. "And if he disappears," Ethan said, "then we work without him. We have enough." Calhoun looked at Ethan. Ferris pulled the full file from the county records. "There are 3 prior complaints against Hartwell's operations, all from smaller property holders, all resolved the same way: license pressure isolation, eventual forced sale. The pattern is documented. Crane already has it." Ethan processed that. "Then the hearing tomorrow isn't just about Sarah's case." "No," Calhoun said. "It never was. Your telegram was the thing that connected the dots, but the dots were already there." He paused. "Hartwell has been doing this for a long time. He's just been doing it to people nobody was paying attention to." Something settled in Ethan's chest, a cold thing, a clarifying thing, the specific anger that comes not from one injustice, but from the understanding that the one injustice you happened to see was standing in for dozens of others you hadn't. "What do you need from me tomorrow?" Ethan said. "Be in the room," Calhoun said. "And keep her in the room. Hartwell is going to try to rattle her. He's going to try everything short of what's criminal to make her reconsider, pull back, not show up. If she shows up and she's steady—" He paused. "She'll be steady." "She will," Ethan said. He said it without hesitation. Calhoun looked at him with a brief knowing expression that Ethan chose not to respond to. "Go back to town," Calhoun said. "I'll come in after dark. Less theater." Ethan rode back. Hartwell made his move at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which was earlier than Ethan had expected, and more direct than he'd given him credit for. He came himself. Not Dobbins. Not an intermediary. Gerald Hartwell walked into Sarah's butcher shop in the middle of the working day, closed the door behind him, and stood in the middle of the shop, the way men stand in rooms they've already decided they own. He was a large man, 60s, with the particular manner of someone who had been obeyed for so long that he'd stopped distinguishing between expectation and entitlement. He wasn't physically threatening. He was too old and too comfortable for that. His threat was the quieter kind, the kind that came from connections and resources, and a deep familiarity with exactly how much pressure a person could sustain before they gave. Sarah didn't stop working when he came in. She kept cutting, didn't look up. "Miss Dawson," Hartwell said. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, still cutting. He looked at her working hands. Something crossed his face, respect almost quickly suppressed. He wasn't here to respect her. "I think it's time we had a direct conversation," he said. "Without lawyers, without—" He paused. "Without outside influences." "Say what you came to say," she said. He moved a step closer to the counter. "You've been fighting a losing battle for 2 years. You're smart enough to know that. Whatever advantage you think you've gained this week—" He paused. "The circuit judge's injunction is a delay. That's all. Delays end." Sarah said, still cutting. "I'm prepared to offer you $1,500 for this property," he said. "That's considerably more than market value, more than you'd see from any other buyer." He let that sit. "You could start over somewhere else, somewhere that wants what you offer, somewhere that doesn't—" He seemed to search for the diplomatic version. "Somewhere more suited to my kind," she said. She looked up for the first time. Her eyes were very steady. "Go ahead and say it, Mr. Hartwell. You've been saying it with lawyers and council votes and violation notices for 2 years. Just say it the way you actually mean it." He held her gaze. He was not a man who was often looked at that way steadily, without fear, without the performance of deference that he'd become accustomed to. "I mean," he said carefully, "that you are a capable woman who has been swimming against the current in this town and will continue to do so no matter what happens tomorrow. I am offering you a way out." "You're offering me surrender dressed up as a favor," she said. "No." Something shifted in his face. Not rage, he was too controlled for rage. Something colder. "The hearing tomorrow," he said, "will not go the way you think it will. Crane is known for being procedurally rigorous. Rigorous procedures take time. Time costs money. You don't have the resources for a prolonged legal process, Miss Dawson. I do." "Maybe," she said. "But I've got a federal fraud case building against you in 3 counties and a bookkeeper who knows where every questionable number in your accounts is filed." She set down the knife. "And I've got a man who rode down from a mountain specifically to make sure that none of that disappears before it reaches the right people." Hartwell was quiet. The mention of Pryor, she hadn't named him, but she didn't have to move through his composure like a crack in ice. Small. Visible. $1,500, he said again. "Final offer." "You can keep it," she said. She picked up the knife. "I'll see you tomorrow." He stood there for another moment, a man unaccustomed to the room not bending toward him, trying to locate where the leverage was and finding it wasn't where he'd put it. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Sarah kept cutting. Her hands were perfectly steady. Ethan, who had been standing in the doorway to the back room where he'd been checking the barrel inventory when Hartwell walked in, waited until the front door closed and the footsteps faded before he walked into the main room. She looked up. "How long were you back there?" "Long enough," he said. "You didn't come out." "You didn't need me to." She held his gaze. Then she went back to work, and he could see in the set of her shoulders the truth of what had just happened. Not triumph, not relief, just the quiet, solid confirmation that she was exactly what she'd always known herself to be, and that a man with $1,500 and 30 years of practice getting his way had just found out the same thing. Pryor came at 4. He didn't come to the shop. He came to the boarding house, asked for Ethan at the desk, and waited in the front room with his satchel in his lap and his hands wrapped around it like it was the only solid thing in the world. When Ethan came down the stairs and saw him, Pryor looked up with the expression of a man who has made a decision he's not entirely at peace with, but is entirely committed to. "I need to talk to Calhoun," he said. "I know," Ethan said. "I know where he is," Pryor said. "I know he rode in last night, in a town this size." "I know," Ethan said again. He sat down across from Pryor. "Tell me what's in the satchel." Pryor looked at it. His hands tightened briefly and then released the way you let go of something you've been holding too long. 3 years of accounts, he said. All of them. Not just Sarah Dawson's assessment. All of it. Every property transaction where the numbers were adjusted. Every payment that went to Putnam for the assessments. Every... He stopped. "I've been keeping duplicates since the end of the first year. I knew what I was doing wasn't..." He stopped again. "I told myself it was just numbers, that it didn't hurt anyone directly, that I wasn't the one making the decisions." His jaw tightened. "I was wrong." Ethan looked at the satchel. "Does Hartwell know you kept duplicates?" "No," Pryor said. "He thinks I'm loyal. I've been very careful about appearing loyal." He looked at Ethan. "I heard what happened at the shop this afternoon. What she said to him." "You were there." "No, but people talk." He swallowed. "She told him about the bookkeeper. She didn't use my name, but he knows it's me. And I know that by tomorrow morning, whether I cooperate with Calhoun or not, Hartwell is going to..." He stopped. The calculation was clear in his face. "He's going to see me as a liability regardless. So the only question left is which side of this I want to be on when the dust settles." "That's a pragmatic way to think about it," Ethan said. "It's also the right way," Pryor said quietly. "I've been doing the pragmatic thing that wasn't right for 3 years. He stopped, looked at the satchel. "I'm tired of it." Ethan stood. "Come with me." He took Pryor to Calhoun, who was at the livery stable in the back stall, which was where Calhoun had taken himself and his horse after arriving after dark. Calhoun looked at the satchel, and at Pryor, and at Ethan, with the expression of a man who has just been handed the last piece of a puzzle he'd been working for months. "Sit down," Calhoun said to Pryor. Pryor sat. He opened the satchel. And for the next 2 hours in the back of a livery stable, while Cutter's Ridge moved through its Wednesday evening, Timothy Pryor laid out 3 years of Gerald Hartwell's private fraud in precise, documented accountant's detail. Ethan sat in the corner and listened and said nothing, and thought about the mountain, and about a woman who had been facing this alone for 2 years, and about the specific way justice sometimes works, not dramatically, not loudly, but in the quiet accumulation of details in back rooms by people who got tired of carrying the wrong thing. He went to her at 8 o'clock. She was closing up the shop, the end-of-day routine that he had watched enough times now to know by sequence the tools cleaned and ordered, the block scrubbed, the front window closed against the evening dust. He knocked on the frame and she looked up. "How are you?" he said. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "Tired," she said. "And ready. Which is probably the best you can hope for the night before something like this." Pryor came in, he said. He gave Calhoun 3 years of accounts. She went still. Then quietly, "All of it. All of it." She turned away from him and put both hands on the edge of the counter and stood there for a moment with her head down. He watched her and gave her the space to feel whatever she was feeling without filling it with words. After a moment, she straightened. When she looked at him, her eyes were bright but dry. Sarah Dawson did not cry easily and did not cry in front of people at all. But she was near enough to something that the nearness of it showed. "It's going to be all right," she said. She said it to herself as much as to him, testing it, deciding if she believed it. "Yes," he said, simply, without qualification. She looked at him for a long moment. "Are you going to be there tomorrow?" "In the room." "Front row," he said. Something shifted in her face. The specific softening that happens when a person stops bracing for something they'd expected to have to do alone. It wasn't weakness. It was the opposite of weakness. It was a person strong enough to let someone stand beside them without feeling diminished by it. "I've been alone in every hard thing I've ever done," she said. "My whole life." "I know," he said. "I don't know how to—" She stopped. Her hands moved slightly, a gesture that was unfamiliar on her, uncertain, the movement of a woman reaching for words in a language she didn't speak fluently. "I don't know how to have someone in the room. I'm going to get it wrong sometimes." "So will I," he said. She looked at him. "You're very certain about uncertain things." "I'm certain about a few things," he said. "You're one of them." The shop was quiet around them. The tools on the wall, the clean counter, the ordered life she had built from $60 and her uncle's equipment and 5 years of getting up before dawn. Everything she'd defended. Everything that was about to either be confirmed or taken away, and the answer coming tomorrow, whether she was ready or not. She crossed the room. She stopped close enough that he could have touched her, close enough that the particular warmth of her presence was something he felt in his chest, in a way that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Ethan," she said. "Sarah," he said. She put her hand on his arm. Not pulling him toward her, not a gesture that asked for anything, just a hand on his arm, firm and warm and deliberate. An anchor, a declaration. He put his hand over hers. They stood like that for a moment in the lamplit shop. Two people who had come to each other sideways and accidentally, and without any plan, standing in the middle of everything that was going to change tomorrow, and everything that had already changed without either of them deciding when. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "You too," she said. He walked back to the boarding house through the summer dark, and he did not sleep for a long time. He lay on the narrow bed with his hands behind his head and listened to the town settle into night, and thought about the woman across the street, and about the hearing in the morning, and about the mountain waiting above everything patient and permanent and entirely possible. Check. Thursday morning came hard and fast, the way big days always do, suddenly present before you've finished deciding how to face them. Ethan was up at 5. He dress-checked his coat pocket for the copies of the assessment records habit. Not need the documents were with Calhoun and Beaumont, who had ridden in from Abilene on the night stage and went out into the pre-dawn dark. Sarah's light was already on. He knocked. She opened the door in her work clothes apron, still off, hair pinned tight. She had coffee on already, which he hadn't expected, and she poured him a cup without being asked, and they stood in the shop in the dark before dawn and drank it and didn't say much, which was the right thing. "Beaumont's in town," she said. "I know, he found me last night. He's ready." He sounded, she searched for the word, confident, which either means everything is very good or he's the kind of lawyer who sounds confident when everything is terrible. "Which do you think?" Ethan said. She considered. "Both sometimes, but mostly the first one this morning." He nodded. "Crane arrives between 9 and 10. The hearing starts when he's ready. Hartwell has been served. Putnam has been served. Greer. Greer is going to bluster," Sarah said. "He blusterers when he's frightened. It actually works in our favor because it makes him look guilty when he's trying to look innocent." Ethan looked at her. "You've thought about all of this?" "I've had 2 years," she said. "I know every person in that room. I know how they move when they're scared and how they move when they're comfortable. I've watched them." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "What I didn't have was someone to watch with me." He felt that in the place in his chest that had been shut for 5 years and was slowly and without ceremony opening. "You have someone now," he said. The same words as before, but heavier this time with more behind them. She met his eyes. "I know," she said. The hearing was 4 hours away. The town was waking up around them, and Gerald Hartwell was somewhere in it, making his last calculations, and the circuit judge was an hour outside of Cutter's Ridge on a horse he'd been riding since dawn, and Timothy Pryor was at the boarding house with his satchel and his 3 years of someone else's decisions, and Calhoun was at the telegraph office, sending the morning update to the federal land office in the capital. And all of it was converging on one room, in one building, in one small town that had spent 2 years trying to make one woman feel like she didn't belong there. Sarah set down her cup. She untied her apron from the hook by the door and put it on, tying it at the back with the quick practiced motion of someone suiting up for a fight, which is exactly what she was doing. "Ready," Ethan said. She looked at him. Something moved in her face, steady and sure, and absolutely without fear, the look of a person who has decided to stop carrying a thing alone and is surprised to find the weight has not made her weaker, but stronger. "I've been ready," she said, "for 2 years. She walked out the door. He walked beside her, and Cutter's Ridge, waking into the heat of a Thursday morning, saw 2 people walking up the main street together, not side by side as an accident, but side by side as a decision, and began in the small collective way of towns to understand that something was about to be settled. Judge Harold Crane arrived at 9:47 in the morning, which was earlier than anyone had expected, and later than Ethan had hoped, and the 11 minutes between 9 and 9:47 were the longest 11 minutes Sarah Dawson had sat through in 2 years of long minutes. She sat in the front row of the town hall with Beaumont on her left and Ethan on her right, and the assessment copies, and Beaumont's filed injunction on the table in front of her, and she kept her hands flat on her thighs and her spine straight and her face composed, because the room was filling up behind her, and she knew without looking that every person coming through that door was watching her to see if she'd break before it even started. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to know who was watching. She'd spent 3 years in this town being watched. Beaumont was going over his notes in a low voice, not to her, but to himself, the quiet rehearsal of a lawyer who was confident but thorough. Calhoun sat at a separate table to the left, federal credentials visible the satchel that had been Pryor's sitting beside him, like a quiet declaration. Pryor himself was in a chair along the side wall, pale and still, with the particular stillness of someone who has done the irrevocable thing and is now waiting to find out what it costs. Hartwell came in at 9:30 with his own lawyer, a man from the county seat named Marsh, who wore his suit like armor and moved through spaces like he owned them. Hartwell didn't look at Sarah when he passed her table. That deliberate non-looking told her everything she needed to know about the state of his confidence. Putnam came in separately, sat as far from Hartwell as the room allowed, and did not look at anyone. Greer came in loud, which was what Ethan had predicted, talking to 2 men near the door, as though the day were ordinary, as though his name wasn't on a subpoena sitting in Beaumont's folder. Aldrich didn't come at all. That was the first thing. Ethan noticed it 2 minutes before the judge arrived and leaned close to her. "Aldrich isn't here," he said quietly. "No," she said. "That means either he's been told to stay away or he made the decision himself." He paused. "Either way, it means something moved in Hartwell's camp overnight that we don't know about yet." She filed that and held it and kept her face still. Then the door at the front of the room opened, and Judge Harold Crane walked in. He was smaller than the name suggested. Compact, methodical, with the unhurried quality of a man who had been in more charged rooms than this one, and had learned that the room always adjusts itself to whoever refuses to adjust to it. He set his case on the table at the front, looked at the room over the rims of his glasses, and said without preamble, "We'll begin." The room went quiet faster than Sarah would have thought possible for a room that full. Crane looked at the assembled parties. His eyes moved across Beaumont, across Calhoun's credentials, across Marsh and Hartwell, and then stopped briefly on Sarah herself. Not with sympathy, not with judgment, just with the attention of a man cataloging what was in the room before he started working in it. Then he opened his case and took out a folder and said, "I've reviewed the filings. I have questions. I'll ask them in order. Everyone will get a turn. Nobody will speak out of turn, or I'll clear the room and conduct this as a private proceeding." He looked up. "Is that understood?" A murmur of "Yes, sir" moved through the room. "Good," Crane said. "Mr. Putnam, you're first." Putnam stood up from his chair along the wall. He moved to the front of the room with the walk of a man going to his own sentencing. His face was the color of old bread. "I have here," Crane said, holding up a document, "the assessment record for the property at 14 2nd Street, Cutter's Ridge, dated 3 times across 2 years, revised upward on each occasion. I also have the assessment record for an adjacent vacant parcel purchased by Mr. Gerald Hartwell's company, revised downward in the same period." He set the documents side by side on the table in front of Putnam. "I'd like you to explain the methodology that produced these opposing revisions on comparable properties." Putnam opened his mouth, closed it. His lawyer he'd brought a younger man who looked as though he'd been retained at the last minute and was not enjoying the experience, put a hand on his arm and said something in his ear. Putnam sat back down. "On advice of counsel," his lawyer said. Crane looked at him over his glasses for a long moment. "Mr. Putnam," he said, "I want to be very clear with you about something. You are not currently facing criminal charges. The question I have asked is a procedural one about the conduct of your public office. The choice to invoke counsel's advice in response to a procedural question about public records." He paused. "Is it self-informative? Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Putnam understood. Anyone in the room would have understood. Crane was telling him that silence was an answer, and that it was not a good one. Putnam's lawyer leaned in again, another murmured exchange. Then Putnam looked up and said in the voice of a man walking off a cliff, "Because the alternative is worse, I received payments." The room didn't erupt. It went very quiet. The specific quiet of a room full of people absorbing something they'd suspected and are now hearing confirmed. Sarah kept her hands flat on her thighs. Beside her, Ethan did not move. "From whom?" Crane said. Putnam looked at the table. "From Mr. Hartwell's accounts." "In exchange for what?" "For—" He stopped. Then flatly, "for adjusting the assessments as directed." Hartwell's lawyer was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, my client." "Sit down, Mr. Marsh," Crane said without raising his voice. Marsh sat. "Mr. Putnam, I appreciate your candor. We'll return to you." Crane made a note, then he looked across the room. "Mr. Calhoun." Calhoun stood. He didn't move to the front, he just stood at his table. "Yes, Your Honor." "You have additional documentation relevant to this matter." "I do." Calhoun picked up the satchel. 3 years of duplicated accounts kept by Mr. Hartwell's former bookkeeper, Mr. Timothy Pryor, documenting payment records, assessment instructions, and correspondence related to the properties in question. He set the satchel on the edge of Crane's table. "And records from the county land office showing 2 prior complaints of similar conduct by Mr. Hartwell's operations in adjacent counties, both dismissed without hearing." Dismissed without hearing. The phrase sat in the room like something solid. Behind Sarah, she heard the sound of people shifting in their seats. The specific uncomfortable movement of a community realizing that the thing they'd decided to not look at had been considerably larger than the piece of it they'd chosen to ignore. Crane opened the satchel. He did not read the contents in full. He was a man who had reviewed his materials. He simply confirmed their presence, closed it, and looked at Hartwell directly for the first time. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, "would you like to make a statement?" Hartwell stood. He was still composed. Ethan would have given him that. He had the composure of a man who has prepared for the possibility of this moment, even if he'd worked hard to ensure it didn't come. His lawyer stood beside him and looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. "Your Honor," Hartwell said, "what is being characterized here as fraud is the normal conduct of business in a growing community. Assessment revisions are a standard tool of economic development. My company has invested considerably in Cutter's Ridge, and that investment—" "Mr. Hartwell," Crane said. Hartwell stopped. "Did you or did you not direct Mr. Putnam in his capacity as a public official to manipulate property assessments for the purpose of coercing a sale from Miss Sarah Dawson?" The room was absolutely silent. Hartwell looked at his lawyer. His lawyer gave him the small, almost invisible shake of the head that means, "Do not answer that." "On advice of counsel," Hartwell said. Crane wrote something in his folder. He wrote for quite a long time longer than the simple notation would have required, and the sound of his pen on paper in the silent room was the loudest thing Sarah had heard all morning. "All right," Crane said. He closed the folder. He looked at the room. "Here is what is going to happen." What happened was this. The emergency session vote that had suspended Sarah's operating license was declared procedurally void on the grounds of improper notice, a determination Crane made in under 3 minutes with Beaumont's documentation of the notification failure laid in front of him. The license was reinstated immediately and without condition. Putnam's conduct was referred for criminal investigation by the Territorial Prosecutor's Office. He was advised not to leave Cutter's Ridge pending that investigation. Greer, who had been sitting in his chair getting progressively less loud since Putnam's statement, was similarly referred his role in the emergency session conducted without proper notice, made him a party to the proceedings' irregularities, and the question of what else he'd participated in would be examined by the same investigation. Aldrich's absence was noted in the formal record. A copy of the record would be sent to his home address. Hartwell's lawyer attempted 3 separate procedural objections during Crane's summary. Crane overruled all 3 in the tone of a man swatting flies, not impatient, simply efficient. When Marsh attempted a 4th, Crane removed his glasses, looked at him, and said, "Mr. Marsh, I have been a circuit judge for 19 years. I have heard better objections from first-year clerks. Please sit down." Marsh sat down. Calhoun remained at his table throughout making notes, his face giving away nothing. But at one point when Crane was overruling Marsh's second objection, Calhoun glanced at Ethan across the room and gave him a look that Ethan understood perfectly. This was only the beginning of what Hartwell was going to face. The hearing today was the opening of a door, not the closing of one. And then Crane said the thing that none of them had been prepared for. He said, "I also want to address the conduct of this community." The room went very quiet again. Miss Dawson has operated a lawful business in this town for 3 years. She has paid her taxes and her notes and her bills. She has conducted herself with integrity in her professional dealings. And the record before me, which includes not only legal documents, but testimony gathered by Agent Calhoun from individuals in this community over the past 24 hours, indicates that she has been systematically excluded from the social and commercial networks of this town in ways that go beyond what Mr. Hartwell orchestrated and extend to the general behavior of people in this room. He looked up, looked at the room, not at any one person, at all of them. That is not a matter of law. I cannot subpoena a community's conscience. But I'll say plainly that a town that calls itself civilized and treats its members this way is using the word incorrectly. He closed his folder. We're adjourned. The room let out a breath it had been holding for an hour, and then in the specific way of crowds, it didn't know what to do with itself. Sarah stood up from her chair slowly. Her legs were steadier than she'd expected. Beaumont was beside her immediately, his hand briefly on her arm, the gesture of a lawyer who has just won something and is still processing the size of it. "Injunction is dissolved. License is clear. We have everything we need for the civil case," he said quietly and rapidly. "And Calhoun tells me the territorial prosecutor has enough for criminal charges. This is..." He stopped. "Sarah, this is over." She stood in the middle of it and felt the weight of 2 years beginning slowly and incompletely to lift. It didn't feel the way she'd imagined it would feel. She'd imagined in the small private moments when she'd let herself imagine it that it would feel like winning, like victory with clean edges. What it actually felt like was exhaustion so deep it had become almost physical, the exhaustion of a person who has been running and has been told finally that they can stop. Her legs wanted to buckle. She didn't let them. Ethan was beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, the way he'd stood at every hard moment of the past 5 days, present solid, not requiring anything from her, not filling the space with performance, just there. She turned to look at him. "Beaumont says it's over," she said. "I heard," he said. "Is it?" She said it seriously, not rhetorically. Or is it the kind of over that keeps going in different rooms? The legal part is over, he said. Hartwell's going to face the territorial prosecutor. That's going to take time. Your lawyer handles that part. What happens to your license, your lot, your shop? He met her eyes. That's done. That's yours. She looked at him. The room was moving around them, people leaving, a few people stopping to speak to Beaumont Calhoun, moving toward Crane's table, with another folder, Putnam being quietly guided toward the door by a man Sarah didn't recognize, who had the unmistakable bearing of a territorial official. All of it moving around the two of them like water around stones. I want to go back to the shop, she said. Then let's go, he said. They walked out of the town hall and into the morning heat. And this time, when the town watched them, it was different. The watching was different. Something had shifted in the quality of it. Not warmth, not apology, because towns didn't apologize quickly, and some of them never did. But the particular confidence of a community that has watched someone be dismissed had cracked visibly, and what showed through the crack was uncertainty. The uncertainty of people who had been certain about something and have just been told by a circuit judge in their own town hall that they were wrong. Sarah walked through it, the way she walked through everything. Straight spine, steady pace, not performing anything, not asking for anything from anyone watching. But halfway up the street, Clara Sims came out of the bakery. She didn't say anything elaborate. She was not an elaborate woman. She stepped out onto the boardwalk and looked at Sarah and nodded once slowly, with the full weight of 14 years of watching and knowing, and not having enough power to change things behind that nod. And then she went back inside. Sarah kept walking. But something in her face changed, something small and private, something she didn't show to the street. Ethan saw it, because he was watching her the way he'd been watching her for 5 days carefully, with the attention of a man who found the subject worth studying. He didn't say anything about it. Some things were better left to breathe. What? Back at the shop, she untied her apron from the hook where she'd left it, and put it on, and went to work. He sat on the counter in the back and watched her, and drank the last of the morning's coffee, and didn't pretend that either of them didn't know there was something waiting to be said. She worked for about 20 minutes. Then she stopped, set down what she was holding, turned to face him. What happens now? She said. Not about Hartwell, not about the case. The question was much simpler and much harder than that. He set down the coffee cup. That depends, he said. On what? On what you want, he said. Truly. Not what's practical, not what's cautious. What you want. She looked at him steadily. She was not a woman who reached for things she hadn't thought through, and he could see her thinking it through now, the same careful, thorough attention she brought to her accounts, to her orders, to every decision that mattered. He waited, and didn't rush her, and didn't try to shape the answer by how he held his face. I want to keep the shop, she said. I've always known that part. She paused. I want to stop doing everything alone. That part I know now. Another pause, the longest one. And I want you to not go back up that mountain and disappear for 5 more years. He held her gaze. That wasn't what I was planning, he said. What were you planning? He thought about how to say it in a way that was honest, without being more than she'd asked for. I was planning to stay in Cutter's Ridge a while longer, if that's... He stopped, tried the honest version. I was planning to stay because there's nothing up on that mountain that I want more than I want to be in the same town as you. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, That's the most words you've said about something personal in 5 days. It felt like the right time, he said. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, where he was sitting on the counter, which put them almost at eye level. And she looked at him with those steady dark eyes that had been reading him since the first morning in the alley, and she said, I'm not easy to be around. I know that. I'm not looking for easy, he said. I work too much and I'm stubborn, and I don't ask for help well, even when I need it, and I've been alone so long that... She stopped. I'm going to get things wrong, between us, whatever between us is. So will I, he said. I've been on a mountain for 5 years. My social graces are not what they were. Something moved in her face, the precursor to a real smile, which he had seen very rarely and found each time to be worth considerably more than the full smiles of people who gave them out freely. "You repaired my loading dock without being asked," she said. "That's actually above average." "I'll keep that in mind," he said. The almost smile became a real one, brief but real. And it changed her face so completely. From the composed, guarded, functional face, she showed the world to something warmer and less certain, and far more alive, that Ethan felt it like a physical thing, like a door swinging open in a room that had been shut a long time. He reached out and put his hand against the side of her face. Not asking, not performing, just placing it there the way you place your hand on something you want to confirm is real. She leaned into it. Just slightly. The most careful, deliberate lean, the lean of a woman who doesn't do things without meaning them. "Stay," she said. One word. All of it in one word. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She put her hand over his, the way she'd done the night before, firm and warm and deliberate, and they stayed like that for a moment in the shop that was hers, and had always been hers, and would remain hers. While outside Cutter's Ridge continued the slow, uneven work of reconsidering things it had decided too quickly. Hug. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing worth having ever was. Hartwell's legal situation deteriorated quickly once the territorial prosecutor's office opened its full investigation. Pryor's accounts proved to be as complete as he'd promised: 3 years of documented fraud, clean and legible, the work of a careful young man who had known he might need them someday and had kept them accordingly. 2 of the prior complaints from adjacent counties were reopened. Putnam negotiated a cooperation agreement that did not save him from a significant fine and the loss of his public position, but kept him from prison. Greer blustered through 2 weeks of questioning and emerged considerably quieter, and considerably diminished a man who had mistaken proximity to power for power itself. Aldrich resigned his council seat before anyone asked him to. The letter he submitted cited personal reasons. Everyone in Cutter's Ridge understood what the personal reasons were. Hartwell himself fought it. Of course he fought it. He was a man who had spent 30 years building an operation on the premise that the rules were for other people. And men, like that, don't accept new premises easily. He retained better lawyers. He made arguments. He was, in the estimation of the territorial prosecutor, going to lose anyway, and lose substantially, and the process of losing was going to be long and expensive and would occupy his attention for years. Sarah watched all of it from the shop. She did not attend hearings she wasn't required to attend. She did not follow the legal proceedings with the hungry attention of someone waiting for justice to arrive. She had learned a long time ago that watching a pot didn't make it boil, and she had a business to run. Beaumont handled the legal pieces. Calhoun sent periodic updates through the federal office. She read them, filed them, and went back to work. Ethan stayed. He found a property 3 miles outside of town, a piece of land with a small existing structure that had been empty for 2 years, the former holding of a cattle operation that had failed in the drought season. He paid a fair price for it in cash because he'd been on a mountain for 5 years, and the one thing a mountain costs you is nothing. He repaired the structure with the methodical efficiency of a man who knows how things should be built because he has built them for survival. He came into town most days. He took his meals at Sarah's table more often than not. The town adjusted itself the way towns do. Not graciously, small towns rarely adjust graciously. It was more like the slow rearrangement of furniture in a room where someone has pointed out that the layout made no sense. People who had been cold to Sarah without really thinking about it began to notice that the coldness had required effort and stopped making the effort. Mrs. Hargrove at the dress shop closed her back window as Sarah had suggested, and the issue of smell was resolved without further discussion. Clara Sims began referring customers who mentioned needing good meat to the shop on 2nd Street, which she had apparently been doing in her own way for years, but now did more openly. Webb came by the shop one afternoon about 3 weeks after the hearing. He stood at the counter with his hat in his hands and said without preamble, "I should have done more, earlier, when it still would have cost me something." Sarah looked at him. "You were the only one who told me you'd try," she said. "That's not nothing." "It's not enough either," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't. But I'll take it." He nodded, put his hat back on, went home. It was not a large reconciliation. It was a real one, which was better. Lillian Hartwell left Cutter's Ridge 6 weeks after the hearing. She did not announce it, and she did not make a scene, which was in its way the most dignified thing Sarah had ever seen her do. She simply was there 1 week and gone the next, and the word through town was that she had gone east to a cousin in St. Louis, and that she had taken very little with her, which suggested the going was intentional rather than sudden. The morning before she left, she came to the shop. Early, before the town was fully moving. She knocked on the door frame the way Ethan knocked, which was either coincidence or not. Sarah looked up. "I'm leaving," Lillian said. "I wanted you to know." "I heard," Sarah said. Lillian stood in the doorway with her hands folded in front of her and looked at the shop, at the tools on the wall, the ordered counter, the signs of a life built on competence and stubbornness. Something moved in her face that was more complex than anything Sarah had expected from her. "I don't know how to do what you do," Lillian said. "I don't know how to want things for myself. I've only ever wanted things because other people expected me to want them." She paused. "I think St. Louis might be far enough away from what's expected to figure out if there's anything underneath it." Sarah set down what she was holding. She looked at Lillian. Hartwell truly looked the way she had the night Lillian came to warn her, and felt something that surprised her. Not forgiveness, not quite, and not sympathy in the simple sense. Something more complicated. The specific ache of recognizing in another person a damage different from your own, but equally deep. "I hope you find it," Sarah said. "Whatever's underneath." Lillian looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," she said. For letting me be something other than what my father made me." She stopped. Her composure held. "And for not hating me even when you had every right to." She turned and left before Sarah could respond, which was probably wise, because Sarah didn't have an answer that was entirely true, and she'd spent too long being honest to offer one that wasn't. It was an evening in late summer, the heat finally beginning to suggest that it might someday end, when Ethan came to supper and found Sarah sitting at the table not working. She was just sitting, which he had learned was rare enough to be significant. He sat down across from her. "What is it?" he said. She looked at the table, then at him. "I had an offer today," she said. "Not Hartwell, nothing to do with him. A man from Abilene. He runs a wholesale meat operation, and he wants to contract my shop for a portion of his supply. It would mean more volume than I've ever handled." "That's good," Ethan said. "It's a lot," she said. "It would require expanding, hiring, changing how I do everything." She paused. "Everything I've built has been built small enough that I could hold it alone. If I expand..." She stopped. "If I expand, I can't hold it alone. And I've spent 3 years convincing myself that alone was a choice instead of a circumstance." He understood what she was saying, all of it. "It's not a circumstance anymore," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "It isn't." A pause. "So that's not the reason I'm hesitating. Then what is..." She folded her hands on the table. "I'm afraid," she said, plainly, without apology, the way she said every honest thing. "Not of expanding, of wanting something bigger than what I can protect by myself, of..." She stopped. "Of building something that matters more than I know how to risk." He reached across the table, put his hand over hers. "You've been risking things that mattered for 3 years," he said. "You just didn't have anyone to risk them with." She turned her hand over and held his. "Will you be here?" she said. "Not just in town. I mean, will you be here if the things I build get bigger than I can hold?" He looked at her and thought about the mountain, about the 5 years of intentional alone, and the way he'd come down from it, not knowing what he was looking for, and found it in an alley behind a mercantile on the second day, carrying a barrel no one had offered to help with. He thought about the specific gravity of this woman, not the romantic kind, not the kind that existed because it had been arranged by circumstance or performance, but the kind that existed because she was entirely uncomplicatedly real. And reality, he had learned, was the rarest and most valuable thing in any world. "I'll be here," he said. "I'll be here for the expansion and the hiring and the hard seasons and the years when the supply contracts don't come through. I'll be here when you're stubborn and when you forget to ask for help and when you push me away because it feels safer than letting me stay." He held her gaze. "I came down from that mountain because I was done being somewhere that didn't need me. You need me. Not because you're weak, because you're strong enough to admit it. That's rare. I'm not walking away from rare." Sarah looked at him for a long time. The kind of long that had weight in it, the kind that wasn't silence so much as a whole conversation happening underneath the surface of it. "Take the contract," he said. "Say yes to it." "Yes?" she said. Not to him, to herself, confirming it. Then quietly to him, "Yes." She squeezed his hand once. He squeezed back. She stood and started supper, because she was always the one who started supper, and because some things were better expressed in action than in words, and they both understood that. He stayed at the table and watched her work the same movements he had watched from the first morning, the precision and the economy and the absolute unself-conscious competence of a person doing what they were built to do and felt, with the particular certainty of a man who has learned to trust quiet things, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The first frost came in October. Ethan was at the property by then, the structure solid and weather-tight, the first real winter preparations made. He knew how to prepare for winters. The mountain had taught him that. Sarah came out on a Sunday morning, the first one she'd taken off since the contract with the Abilene operation had come through and expanded everything she'd been afraid of expanding. And she walked the property with him the way she walked her shop, noticing things, assessing things, asking practical questions that were also a kind of investment. Where would the second storage go? Whether the well needed deepening. What the south-facing angle meant for winter light. When she had walked all of it, she stood in the front of the property and looked at the structure and at the land around it and at the ridge above them where the mountain began its proper climb. "You can see the ridge from here," she said. "Yes," he said. "Does that?" She looked at him. "Does it make you want to go back up?" He looked at the ridge, at the clean line of it against the October sky, the particular quality of air at altitude that he could almost feel from here. He thought about what the mountain was to him, what it had been, what it had given him, what it had eventually honestly stopped being enough of. "It makes me glad it's there," he said. "It doesn't make me want to leave." She nodded, looked at the structure again. Then she said with the directness that was simply her native language, "I'm not moving in, not yet. I want to be clear about that." "I know," he said, "but I'm here on Sundays." "I know that too," he said. "And you're at supper most nights." "Yes." She looked at him. "We're building something," she said. "Aren't we?" "Yes," he said. "We are." She looked at the ridge one more time. The first frost was on the ground, silver and thin, the season turning with the indifferent reliability of things that don't ask permission. Everything that summer had broken open the case, the town's certainty about her. The long isolation of two people who had each found their own version of the mountain to hide on had settled into something quieter and more durable. Not an ending. A foundation. Sarah Dawson had come to Cutter's Ridge with $60 and her dead uncle's equipment, and had held on to everything she'd built through 2 years of a town trying to take it. And she had held on by being exactly what she was, and refusing at every moment when it would have been easier to be less. Ethan Cole had come down from a mountain after 5 years of voluntary exile, and ridden into a town he hadn't planned to stay in, and found in the alley behind a mercantile a woman dragging a 200-pound barrel alone, and had understood with the wordless certainty of a man who had spent 5 years learning to read things that were true, that she was the most honest thing he had seen in a long time. He stayed. She let him. And that in the end was the whole of it. Not the hearing, Not Hartwell's unraveling, not the legal victory or the expanded contract or the town's slow, uneven reckoning with what it had done. Those things mattered, but they were not the story. The story was two people who had each decided separately and for different reasons that the walls they'd built were not protection but prisons, and who had found in each other the specific courage to stop building them. The frost caught the light as the morning moved, turning the ground silver white, and Sarah Dawson stood on the land of the man who had ridden down from the mountain to stand beside her. And she was not alone, and she had chosen not to be, and that choice made freely, made clearly made by a woman who had never done anything by halves, was the most solid thing she had ever built.